Australians don't want them there. They're not interested. And they've raised a petition in Australia to say, look, if they do come, free country, but if they do come, they're coming as private citizens. This is not a royal tour, and we do not want a single penny of Australian taxpayers' money spent on the police protecting these two.
That's what furious Australians are going to be saying to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle after this astonishing leak has just proved that the couple have been lying about the security costs on next week's fake royal tour.
Why on earth should these two be given taxpayer-funded security in the first place? They are no longer working royals.
Australian viewers of the Mark Dolan show don't want to see Harry and Meghan. The reason why it went down well in 2018, Paul, is because the Australian public didn't know Meghan Markle very well. Well, they know her now. And what do they know her to be? A gold-digging grifter.
I love you.
44,000 Australians. That's how many people have now signed a petition carrying one brutally direct message. We don't want you here. And the number is still climbing. In just one day, hundreds more names were added. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just a fast-moving public reaction aimed squarely at Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Even the title of the petition doesn't try to soften the blow. No taxpayer funding or official support for Harry and Meghan's private visit to Australia. Straight to the point. No spin, no polish, no diplomatic cushion. And that is where this story stops being just another online complaint and starts turning into something much bigger. Because the real question is not simply whether some people are unhappy. The real question is this. If this is a private visit, why is the backlash becoming so public, so loud, and so difficult to ignore? That is where the story begins. At first, this petition barely made a sound. It was launched by the Sydney-based group Beyond Australia back on November 14, 2025. For months, it went nowhere. Around 200 signatures, hardly a wave, barely even a ripple. Then suddenly, in mid-March, everything changed. 10,000. Then 30,000. Now over 40,000. And when numbers rise that fast, it stops looking like random noise. It starts looking like a visible shift in mood. This was no longer just a petition. It was becoming a scoreboard for public frustration. Beyond Australia didn't leave it there either. They went straight to the top, contacting Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns, and Victorian Premier Jacinta Allan with one simple but loaded question. Will even one taxpayer dollar be used for this trip? It sounds simple enough. But when a simple question doesn't get a clean answer, suspicion fills the gap. And right now, that gap is doing a lot of heavy lifting. According to reports, the Prime Minister and Cabinet said they had no involvement. Home Affairs echoed the same. The Australian Federal Police kept things vague, saying it does not comment on protection arrangements. And then there was the silence. No Australian politician came forward in any meaningful way to publicly defend the visit. That matters. Because in politics, silence is not always neutral. Sometimes silence is the message. Now pause there for a second, because this is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. 2018 Australia and 2026 Australia feel like two completely different worlds. Back in 2018, Harry and Meghan arrived believing Australia was fully on side. The energy was warm. The crowds were there. The curiosity was real. There was goodwill, excitement, and a sense that the country had embraced them. Now look at the mood. There is a petition gaining traction. There are questions over public costs. There is visible skepticism. And there is a growing sense that something has shifted badly. Same country, same names, very different reaction. And when public perception turns that sharply, it usually means something deeper has cracked. Not just attention, not just popularity, trust. Then the focus moves to the events tied to the trip, And that is where the optics start getting even worse. In April 2026, attention turned to the Interreg Psychosocial Safety Summit at Melbourne Park. The event supports Lifeline, a well-known and respected prevention charity, and to be clear, the criticism is not aimed at the charity. The criticism is aimed at the setup. Because people looked at the ticket prices and immediately started asking questions. Platinum tickets were priced at 2,378 Australian dollars. Gold tickets came in at 1,978 Australian dollars. That is already a lot of money for most people. Then, just 9 days before the event, organizers quietly added 2 new ticket options to the booking page: a delegate pass for $997 and a virtual pass for $498. No big announcement. No public explanation. Just a quiet change. And that change did not calm people down. It did the opposite. Because when ticket prices suddenly drop by more than 50% right before an event, people notice. And when they notice, they ask the obvious question. If demand was so strong, why the sudden change? That is the kind of moment when people stop looking at an event as an event and start looking at it as a signal. A signal about pricing. A signal about demand. A signal about whether the whole thing is landing the way it was supposed to. And once that doubt creeps in, every next detail gets viewed through a different lens. Then comes the Meghan retreat, and this is where the story starts to look less polished and far more awkward. The retreat, called Her Best Life, was scheduled for April 17th to 19th at the Intercontinental Coogee Beach in Sydney. It was tied to Gemma O'Neill, operating through Besties Australia. On paper it sounds glossy, premium, exclusive, curated. But then the timeline starts raising eyebrows. According to reports, on October 3, 2025, O'Neill purchased a 3-bedroom cottage in Fitzroy Falls, New South Wales, for $1.025 million Australian dollars. Then, just 7 weeks later, on November 25, 2025, her separate talent company, GMI Agency Thai Limited, went into voluntary liquidation. Now this part matters. Besties Australia and GMI Agency are separate legal entities on paper. That distinction is important. There is no confirmed public proof that retreat money is being used to cover separate company debts. But even without proving that, the sequence of events raises obvious questions. Because when luxury launches, financial distress, and public-facing brand deals start appearing in the same timeline, people begin connecting dots for themselves. And once people start connecting dots, the story becomes much harder to control. By February 24, 2026, the Grant Thornton creditors report reportedly showed total debts of $546,848 Australian dollars, with $543,548 owed to the Australian Taxation Office. That number alone is hard to ignore. But the real shock came from another detail in the report. Administrators reportedly flagged a 7-figure commission payment to an unnamed key client, saying there was no documented loan agreement, no clear commercial reasoning, and no proven benefit to the company. That is not a minor footnote. That is the kind of detail that makes people stop and look again. Because now it is no longer just gossip, personality, or optics. Now people are looking at documents. And documents change the temperature of a story. Then on March 11, 2026, Meghan was announced as the headline speaker for a retreat priced at 2,699 Australian dollars per ticket. That alone was enough to get attention. But then the package details made things worse. On paper, the retreat promised a full experience: 2 nights at the Intercontinental Coogee Beach, a gala dinner, a disco night, Saturday lunch, yoga, sound healing. Meditation sessions with Gemma O'Neill, and a conversation with Meghan during the gala. Sounds luxurious, sounds elevated, sounds exclusive. Then the fine print hit. According to reports, the standard package included a bed you were expected to share with a stranger. And that is where people really started doing a double take. Because if someone is paying 2,699 Australian dollars, they are not expecting shared accommodation to be the surprise waiting in the details. If they wanted a guaranteed private room, they had to move up to the VIP tier at $3,199, which reportedly included an ocean view, a goodie bag, and a photo with Meghan. That price jump turned heads very quickly. Because the brand message was empowerment, wellness, and premium experience. But the customer experience, at least as it was being described, was starting to sound far less aspirational and far more transactional. And that is a dangerous shift. Because once people stop seeing empowerment and start seeing monetized access, the entire emotional frame changes. Then the story took another turn. A journalist from 7 News, Ariana Peake, reportedly paid the full $2,699 herself as a regular customer. No discount, no special treatment. She then asked a simple question: could she keep her own room? She also requested a tax invoice. That is when, according to the report, everything changed. Once organizers realized she worked in media, her ticket was refunded and her access was revoked. The stated reason: no media permitted. But that created another problem. Because according to the reporting, there was no clearly stated rule at checkout saying media professionals were not allowed to attend. And that is the kind of detail that lands badly. Because now the question becomes, was this about privacy or was it about control? That is where public skepticism deepens. Because when an event begins to look tightly managed in terms of who can and cannot be in the room, people stop asking whether it is exclusive and start asking what exactly is being protected. And once that thought enters the conversation, it spreads fast. At the same time, the sold-out narrative also started to wobble. Back in mid-March, the retreat was being pushed as fully booked. Then reports pointed to the website saying, ticket allocation now exhausted. Later, that wording reportedly changed to a handful of additional rooms just released. That change did not go unnoticed. People online caught it immediately. Because the internet always notices when scarcity messaging starts shifting. And when scarcity messaging starts shifting, it usually creates the exact opposite impression from the one organizers were hoping for. Instead of looking in demand, it starts looking like pressure. Instead of looking exclusive, it starts looking like persuasion. And that is a bad trade. Then came the Sussex camp's public response, and this may have been the moment that pushed the story into a whole new phase. On March 26th, the camp reportedly responded by saying the trip was being funded privately and that the petition was essentially a moot point. But it did not stop there. A line in the response reportedly argued that if someone wanted to use the petition to spread misinformation, one could just as easily point out that the overwhelming majority of Australians had not signed it. That may have been intended as sarcasm. But sarcasm is a risky weapon when public frustration is already building. Because once people feel dismissed, they rarely calm down. They harden. And that is exactly what seemed to happen here. Instead of shutting the story down, the response appeared to inflame it. Because in controversies like this, facts matter, yes. But tone can matter even more. People do not always remember every number. They do remember how a response made them feel. And for many, this one landed like a jab. Not reassurance. Not clarity. Not de-escalation. A jab. Beyond Australia, fired back the very next morning with a single sharp line. Silence does not equal consent. Short, clean, effective. And just like that, the petition had new fuel. Then more voices entered the conversation. Royal biographer Tom Bower reportedly framed Meghan's involvement as a money play. PR analyst Maya Ryers reportedly argued that at a time when Harry and Meghan are facing criticism around relatability and authenticity, attaching Meghan's name to a high-ticket exclusive event feels deeply tone-deaf. That matters because once multiple commentators begin reinforcing the same perception from different angles, the story starts to solidify in the public mind. Not because every critic says the same thing, but because they keep landing in the same place. And that place is this. This no longer feels like a goodwill visit. It feels commercial. Then the final contrast hits. Back in 2018, Harry and Meghan carried out public walkabouts, open-air appearances, and event after event with packed crowds and royal tour energy. That visibility was part of the appeal. Now, according to leaked planning notes reportedly shared with selected media, there would be no walkabouts in Australia this time. Not in Sydney. Not in Melbourne. Not in Canberra. The reason given was security costs tied to managing public crowds. But the public did not all read that the same way. Some saw security. Others saw optics. And that distinction matters. Because once public reaction becomes part of the security conversation, people start asking a harder question. Is the crowd the problem or the reception? That may not be a fair question. But fairness is not what drives public commentary. Perception does. The itinerary reportedly included a children's hospital visit, an Invictus Australia event on Sydney Harbour, a women's homelessness shelter, an AFL club stop in Melbourne, a rugby match in Sydney, and a short visit to Canberra without Meghan. But one detail stood out. The retreat was not even listed. According to the planning notes, it was treated as a completely separate commercial event and left off the itinerary entirely. And that single detail sharpened the dividing line even more. Official visit here. Commercial event there. Which brings the whole story back to one central question. Who is paying for what? Because that is the question sitting underneath everything now. The petition asks it from one angle. The summit asks it from another. The retreat raises it in a third way. And while the Sussex camp says the answer is simple, private funding, many people clearly do not think that answer settles the matter. Not anymore. That is why this story keeps growing. Because this is no longer just about a petition. It is no longer just about ticket pricing. It is no longer just about one retreat or one summit. This is about a broader collapse in perception. Once upon a time, Harry and Meghan could arrive in Australia, and the country leaned in with interest, warmth, and goodwill. Now a visible and growing number are leaning back with skepticism. That is the real story. Not just criticism. Not just controversy. But contrast. The contrast between the image they once had and the image now forming around them. One was open, modern, and relatable. The other is starting to look expensive, controlled, selective, and out of touch. And when trust starts to crack, every new detail feels heavier. That is the dangerous part. Because at that point, the issue is no longer whether every allegation is fully proven. The issue becomes what the public finds believable. And once people stop believing the story being sold to them, the damage runs deeper than one bad headline. Back in 2018, Australia ran toward Harry and Meghan. In 2026, a growing number are sending a very different message. Not this time. And in public life, sometimes the most dangerous moment is not the scandal itself. It is the moment when people stop buying the narrative.